Thank you so much, Flora. Thank you, everyone. That was a super interesting and very practical session. So thank you for the folks at Draft.dev for running that. But today, now in this session, what we're going to do instead of the discussion by Tessa is we've been very blessed and lucky to have a very interesting group of people come together and be willing to start talking about this topic, impact-driven DevRel strategy. We have put together a small panel, and we're going to continue with these folks in a couple minutes. So what we've put together for you today is to continue with this discussion on impact-driven DevRel strategy. I will moderate the discussion today, but I will want to welcome the folks that will be joining this session. And this panel, and this will be an Ask Me Anything session as well, which means that we want to have a very lively set of questions coming from the audience as well. If we don't, we will come up with questions here, but we do want to have your input as well. This group has a very long history and experience in the space of DevRel and DevMarketing, and so we definitely want to stimulate the discussion with your questions as well. So, coming back to the topic, impact-driven DevRel strategy, and before we actually jump into that topic, I do want to send our love and our thoughts to Tessa, who was meant to run the session, as noted by Flora, is not well today, and she's been very vocal and mentioned in some posts recently. She's also pregnant, so we want to congratulate her, but as well wish her a very speedy recovery and that she gets well soon. So get well soon, Tessa. Our thoughts are with you. Now, coming back to this group, they are coming to us with experiences across all major tech orgs like Google, Asana, Slack, AWS, MongoDB, Atlassian, IBM, Skyflow, and more. So I want them to introduce themselves. So let's start. Sean, let's start with Sean, actually. Yeah, Sean, I would love you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and I guess why we should listen to you as well with your input here.
I mean, I guess there's probably arguments for not listening to me as well. But hi, everyone. My name is Sean Falconer, and as was mentioned, I lead developer relations and product marketing at Skyflow. I started my career actually on sort of the academic side of computer science. So I was on a path to be a professor or professional researcher at one point. So I spent most of my 20s in university actually doing 3 different degrees in computer science, and then eventually a postdoc. And then as many people who find their way into a postdoc program in Silicon Valley, Bay Area, I quit that world and started a company. So I actually, was a technical co-founder of a company that I launched, ran for 7 years, raised a bunch of money to do that, eventually sold it. And then I went on to work at Google, where that was my sort of first official foray into a developer relations position, where I led and built developer relations teams there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean, and welcome to the discussion. So let's go on. Katie, now you tell us about yourself a little bit. We've crossed paths from time to time, but let's hear more about you as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. And again, Tessa, I hope we do you proud in this impact-driven conversation here. So I'm Katie Miller, currently Director of Developer Marketing at Slack. Previous tech experience doing product marketing at Asana, as well as a fairly long and varied stint at Google across both the ads organization, as well as developer marketing and developer relations organizations. I mentioned in the earlier panel that I realized this is my official 10-year anniversary of being full-time in developer marketing and developer program roles. Never looked back, but I was fortunate. My foray into this developer space is when I first started working in ads at Google, and they would train everyone to be deeply knowledgeable and passionate about the product. So this was back in 2005, and that included the ads API. You never know if a customer is going to ask, and so really everyone foundationally had that understanding that developers were part of the customer base and experience. And so for those first 7 years or so, would kind of come in and out of talking about the API, working with it. My last role within ads was doing product marketing for large advertisers and agencies who were one of the key consumers of the ads APIs, and got the 7-year itch and realized it was a really, really fascinating audience. So dove in head first and have never looked back. And so have had the experience of building out events programs, social media programs, as well as doing core product marketing and operations within developer relations and developer marketing org. So hopefully that gives me some trust and credibility, or is I can talk about all the ways I've done it wrong that you can not do what I've done.
That's a good discussion point for later. So we'll definitely put a pin in that one. And Wesley, so I did do a little bit of stalking with all of you, and you indeed, Wesley, as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and why we should listen to you on this topic as well.
Well, my name is Wesley Faulkner. I've been a developer relations practitioner for the past 4 years, so probably the most junior on this panel. So very honored and pleased to be surrounded by such knowledge. I have had several roles, and I would say this is probably my 4th career. And so most of those different positions were from different angles of how companies are run or not run, depending on where I was at the time. And so learning from like what Katie was saying about what not to do and a lot of the mistakes, I've done those and I've seen those from different angles of marketing for what I used to do before, social media marketing, project management, on-site work, regional support work. I've had leadership positions, multiple titles. So in terms of perspective, I hope that that's what I can add to this panel.
Yeah, indeed. And you did cross a lot of major orgs. So despite your short stint, as you described, the 4 years, it's not that short, and you have experience across many different organizations. So welcome as well. All right, let's get things started. So we're going to start just defining what we're talking about here. That's all right. So let's define what we mean and by impact. What does it mean to build impact-driven strategy? What impact are we talking about? Are we talking about revenue or community or product usage? I would love you all to define that. So I'm going to start. Let's start again with Sean, and then go to Katie and let us know, Sean, how do you define impact here?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of sort of components or things you need to think about when defining impact, and then also relating that back to a strategy that you're going to put together and lead. But I think impact really has to do with like a narrative of a story that you're telling. And ideally, that narrative relates to some generation of actual value for the business. So a lot of it comes down to kind of understanding what the company that you're working for, what are their expectations, what are the sort of drivers of that business, and then aligning what you're going to be doing in the strategy to sort of execute that to what the actual value, perceived value for the business is, and also what their expectations of developer relations, why they're sort of hiring you to do these types of things. But a lot of our job, the good news is a lot of our job in developer relations is about storytelling. It's typically about sort of technical topics. So you can leverage those skills, but it really comes down to kind of framing a problem. What is the major sort of pain point or challenge that you're trying to deal with, and how does that relate back to the business? What is the sort of solution or ways that you're going to solve or address that problem, or the programs that you're going to lead to hopefully alleviate that pain that people are have today, and then what is the value or impact of that result? And I don't think it's purely about numbers. You can have something where I can say that I spoke in front of 1,000 people, or I spoke at an event in front of 30 people, but that can mean very different things in terms of delivering actual value to the business. So a lot of it comes down to sort of crafting the narrative around the things that you're going to be doing and the strategy that you're going to be executing, and telling a story that relates back to what the audience cares about. So as a developer advocate, you might really care about friction of someone's first-time experience with your product. And perhaps you believe that the product team just prioritizes certain features or changes, it could drastically improve developer experience and sort of time to 200 and so on. And that's great, but that story might not resonate with the audience of at a senior leadership level that's trying to make hard choices about the allocation of resources and roadmaps. They probably recognize that friction is bad, but in comparison to putting resources behind something that is a feature that directly leads to revenue, they're likely going to pick prioritizing a revenue generating feature over better developer experience every time. So you want to be able to sort of craft the narrative of impact around, in this case, revenue or internal cost savings or product growth or something like that, based on your understanding of what the audience sort of cares about. So I think impact really comes down to telling a story that's carefully crafted based on what your audience cares about. And then that should be aligned, or essentially you're putting together a strategy that's going to allow you to deliver that impact that's aligned with the business.
Thank you. Katie?
A lot of agreement and consensus with what Sean shared. And the way that I really think about it, particularly now having worked at two companies that I would say are, I think the language that we used in our prep session was platform plus, which is it's not selling a developer tool or solution outright, but offers platform as a core part of its offering. And to me, it's making a very explicit connection that investment in developer makes the overall value proposition of the product more compelling and more useful and more sticky. And what it comes down to, in addition to narrative, from my perspective, which really gets into the savviness and sophistication of how to do developer content and developer marketing right, so it doesn't feel like that, bad word in the room of marketing, is also some comfort with how metrics are reported. And I mentioned this in the earlier session, and I'll reiterate it, is being opportunistic of how to not just have the core metrics that developer relations has, particularly around reach and engagement and feedback. It's also figuring out how to plug into other business metric systems, whether it be revenue tracking and so forth, working with a data science team to be making those connections. I think we all fundamentally believe that extensibility through platform makes a product more compelling and makes it stickier. And truly, that's the impact that we can have. And so having that comfort with being part of a set of metrics that really proves that, not just in spirit, but in actuality.
And I'm not gonna talk about how each of these perspectives are the perfect answer and then I have nothing to talk about. Instead, what I'll do is I'll give a little bit of color about the approach to both of them that I see that is also a big part of it, is that I think they all said it in their own way, but I think the internal stakeholders of the company each have an opinion and some sort of vested interest in developer relations and how it's done and how it can service their own goals. And so making sure that the definition of what is to be accomplished or what is expected is kind of mainlined between all of the stakeholders internally. And it doesn't just go vertically, it branches out upwards to make sure that every person who is the head of their department understands how DevRel touches what they do. So internal alignment is one of the first things that I do to make sure that when I consider success, that everyone does see it as a success because you're able to push on the thing that each of them are monitoring or measuring or seeing how you are affecting their ultimate goal. So, so transparency, great. Being able to move the needle out externally, great. But I'm just adding the little bit that I can because you did such a great job of just internal stakeholder alignment in terms of visibility of success from the people who basically determine if you're doing a good job is something to help enable all the further strategies.
Very helpful, very interesting, clarifying that as well. So we've heard, defining impact, just to summarize a little bit. We've heard from each of you that it's about telling a story that your audience cares about. It is about revenue. It is about internal savings, and we do need to discuss that and admit that here, as well as what was mentioned, extensibility of the platform, making it clear that investment developers makes the overall usage of the product and makes the increases the overall usage and makes the product more sticky. And then lastly, Wesley, what you mentioned there, very important, is aligning that across the entire organization and defining with each stakeholder. What I'm understanding is defining with each stakeholder what is success, defining what they are expecting, and that is going to tie everything together, and that creates a very impactful strategy across the org. Thank you. That was really helpful. Now, since we've defined this, we've talked about set our baseline here, let's talk about something across each of you. What is the most actually impactful thing that you've worked on that we can, kind of reflect all of what we just mentioned before? Who wants to go first? Who's ready? Anyone? Wesley, welcome.
I guess to harken back what I was saying about internal alignment, when I was at my previous company, I made sure that everyone in each department understood how DevRel can service and help them. And a lot of the glue work internally was part of the success, that everyone knew not only what we were doing, but I would be the conduit to pass information back and forth between each department, so that we were able to leverage the current initiatives from advertising to forecasting, all into a kind of like a single push, so that there was alignment, so that our external facing endeavors seem like we're all on the same page. And I think when companies get to a certain size, then it's kind of hard to like keep track of everything that's going on. One thing that helped to help kind of like solidify this, and this is the thing that I hang my hat on, is that in part of DevRel, I didn't just like work on making sure that our advocates were participating in marketing events and partner events and webinars and blog posts, but I created an internal community. And so that people from multiple departments would be assigned specific company goals that we were trying to leverage and push. And so that they would be able to find more, let's say, synergies with different departments, because each group, let's say social media group that I created, also there was like a meetup group that I created internally, that we were able to utilize the different skill sets from each of the departments to move a different goal from a voluntary workspace. So instead of getting more headcount, getting like more resources where we didn't have one because we were a startup and scrappy, we're finding the people who wanted to really share their passions and develop new skill sets around these passion projects that also furthered the company's goals and what we wanted to really do. And so it increased team building internally, it increased community internally, it increased networks of cross communications from different departments internally. And that was one that we did a 6-month pilot, and every single one of the people who volunteered to do one of these roles said that they would do it again in a heartbeat. And the retention levels from an HR perspective was also through the roof, because we kept all of the people, and during the time of people doing a lot of job hopping. So in terms of efficiently using resources so that we were able to get the most amount of benefit, I would say that personally is the thing that I'm super proud of.
I'm happy to go next, because it actually piggybacks really nicely off of what Wesley shared, which is in terms of how to do this all in how to be impactful, particularly with constrained resources and constrained environments. Although someone did challenge me on that phrasing at one point, which is, aren't we always in constrained resources and constrained environments, no matter how big or small the team is? And I was like, touche. I think that that's a fair point. We could always want more. And yet we work within the box that we have and that we're in. As I was reflecting on this question, I realized that I could call out specific examples of programs that I've had the good fortune to lead and be part of. And then I recognized that there was actually a pattern and theme across those, and that what I feel like I've worked on, and that to give credit where credit's due, the teams that I've been part of, the cross-functional stakeholders, the individuals that I've managed, the great work they've done, it's been about process, and it's been about scale and resiliency. And this is the program manager hat that I'm wearing in this moment, which is, and this is where a lot of what Wesley says really resonated with me, which is building up scalable, replicable processes that allow something to continue to be measured and have impact. Examples of that within social media were, how can we really think about what is an intake process for requests from across the organization, so we can be really thoughtful and strategic about what content we release, how we engage in it, how we track and measure it, how somebody can see the outcome across the channels. Similarly for events, that it wasn't, hey, I really want to sponsor this event, but there was a rubric for making those decisions. There were expectations that were set out of, what is it going to take? What is the expectation from a reporting perspective, from a staffing perspective, from a content perspective? How do we make sure that we're making decisions because it is tied back to those larger business objectives, and we have a way to report out on it? Even within some of these leaner organizations, going back to like fundamental core programs that we know are valuable to developers, how to make sure that we're connecting with those developers and that they know the content that's coming out through things like social media channels, newsletter subscriptions, and so forth. Investing in using tools like Asana, like Slack. Yes, I am a little bit biased, to make sure that, like, I call it the hit by the bus phenomenon. Like, if I get hit by a bus one day, that somebody would be able to step in and keep those programs running forward to have impact, because that's what gives that reach when you don't have as many feet on the ground. And that's what ensures that good programs continue running over time.
Sean?
Yeah, so I guess I'll build a little bit on also, I think, some of the things that Wesley and Katie talked about, and maybe with some specific examples. So when so I started at Skyflow in January, so it's been about 10 months now. And one of the challenges that we have that is somewhat unique to our company is that our product is like a new category of product. So we essentially have created something called a data privacy vault, which is an architectural solution to essentially privacy and security. But this is our sort of unique challenge whenever you create like a new category of product, is there's not necessarily an existing sort of community for this thing. Like if you are, launching a new NoSQL database, then a natural place to start would be, well, let's go to like the MongoDB community and see how we can, bring some of those people over or something like that. We don't have sort of that natural fit. And the other challenge is that security and privacy is something that I think we've sort of failed to properly educate engineers on. If you, even reflecting back on my 10 years of university, you're really lucky if you took one course on, encryption at some point. So it's something that people aren't necessarily actively seeking solutions to, and they don't even know that it's a problem a lot of times. They just don't know what they don't know. However, there are problems related to this space that people are seeking solutions to, like, how do you secure a social security number in a database, or how do you keep customer data in a log file so that it doesn't end up in a data breach or something like that. And a lot of the sort of most impactful things that I've tried to do or that I've done has been around, like, how do we kind of address this major pain point of educating the market that this thing exists? And I've leveraged sort of the content marketing abilities that I picked up when running my startup. So my startup, I was able to, with really no resources, no marketing budget, grow our blog traffic from 0 to 100,000 monthly organic visits, and then use that to essentially turn it into revenue. And I'm applying similar strategies to what we're doing at Skyflow in order to build up our thought leadership, build up awareness within engineering and technical practitioner communities to sort of educate the market. And the vision that I originally painted when I first joined was that in 5 years, I want to be in a place where every sort of engineer, architect in the world understands that when it comes to building out a product, an infrastructure, same way that you're making choices about a database, a data warehouse, all these types of architectural decisions you're making. A data privacy vault is part of that conversation. And ideally, of course, I want Skyflow to be delivering that, but people should understand that. And that's really been my goal. And just as recently as last week, the IEEE magazine, there was an article that came out that was written by a former executive at Microsoft that I've never talked to, we have no relationship with. And he wrote an article essentially on how we need to move from sort of privacy by design to engineering solutions for privacy. And that entire article about the future of privacy and security was based on the vision of a data privacy vault being part of core infrastructure, which is essentially the vision that I had painted, my 5-year vision. And so that was like amazing sort of impact from a perspective of like a really strong signal that the things that we're been investing in and trying to educate the market on is actually succeeding. So I was really excited about that. And then the other thing, going back to like some of the things that Wesley was talking about was that we are, a small startup, but a lot of it about being successful and having impact comes down to scaling beyond yourself. So a lot of it is like, I understand we need to do these different things, but I can't do everything. I'm only one person, but I can set up processes and teach people within the company. We have a lot of very, very smart, very talented, experienced people in security and privacy space. How do I give them a voice so that they understand how can I take my expertise and turn it into a blog post or speak at an event, even if that's not really sort of their core competency because they're used to being in the weeds of, writing the code to do this type of stuff, but I can set up those processes, help them get there. And then that's a way to sort of scale our messaging and stuff that goes beyond just myself, but I can sort of enable the team. So that's another big area of I think impact that I've had early in the organization is scaling beyond myself and kind of getting everybody to contribute to the overall goals of what we're trying to do from a developer relations perspective.
Awesome. So I'm hearing a lot of it has to, what you're all discussing has to do with the internal side of things and the internal dynamics of the teams, and getting everyone on the same page, but aligning and whatnot. All right. Awesome. So I'm looking at the time. We don't have a lot of time for this discussion. I think we could go on for hours, and I do have quite a few questions here that we've noted. So let's talk about, I'm actually going to jump onto a topic through some of my notes and that I wanted to discuss. And one is about successes. Of course, we all have success with all your experiences. I'm sure you've succeeded in many things, but what's probably most interesting is the failures and what learning opportunities we've gotten from them. So let's talk about the failures. And I want to get up close and personal a little bit on this. So can we talk about one of your biggest failures and what we all in the community and all the audience can learn from those failures? I'm going to jump to Wesley again so you can get started on this. If you have something you can talk to us about.
It's not if I have something, is if I can think of which one's the biggest one. I'm going to go quickly to make sure there's enough time for everyone else. But I remember when I was at a company that I won't name, where I was hired to kind of change the thought or the impression of the company and the products. And so I was out there speaking a lot, thinking that since that was my mandate that I was going to do, and I neglected to follow through with my impact internally. And so even though that I understood what the community needs were, how to best serve them, what they were looking for, my lack of internal power and leverage made me ultimately unsuccessful in that role. And I wish I've done two things. One is to listen to figure out or do an audit of whatever feedback channels that they had already, Twitter, forums, whatever, and then understood what all of those requests were coming from the community. And then for all the things that I was told that he wanted me to do, figure out why they weren't successful before I joined. And answering those two questions would have definitely set me up for success, but I flamed out pretty quickly.
Katie?
Similar in terms of the lesson of listening, but more internally. When I came into some developer marketing roles, as well as actually moving as a marketer into developer relations, I think I made assumptions from folks about roles and responsibilities, about trust, about awareness and understanding of each other's work. And I didn't ask questions up front in a number of instances. And it took a little bit of backpedaling and a little bit of trust and relationship building. I came in, I'm like, I'm here to solve all the problems. And they're like, we don't have problems to solve and you're just causing friction. And it was a humbling experience. I was like, aren't we all here? Aren't we all together? Isn't this fun? And they're like, no, you're a marketer and you're creating process and we don't want process. And so it really was, and it's something that I've carried forward into future roles, is really starting from that place of open-mindedness and curiosity and understanding. Is not coming in just to rip the Band-Aid off and reinvent the wheel, but to actually, to Wesley's point, like, what are we working from here? Obviously, this lesson can parlay into listening to external communities. It's not exclusive to developer marketing and developer relations, but definitely was something that I experienced and I learned from the hard way.
Thank you, Katie. Always let your team help you get to where you need to go. Awesome. Thank you. And Sean, something you want to share with the group?
Sure. I mean, I think I've made so many mistakes, but over the years, but I think definitely like one of the biggest mistakes I made, and this wasn't specifically to, I wasn't working in a developer relations marketing role at the time. It was when I was doing my startup. I think it's relevant to everybody just the same, is when we had just raised a couple $1 million. And that's when I left sort of the academic world and we were doing our startup full time. And we made a lot of mistakes in the first sort of 8 months of running that business, where we, scaled resources way ahead of like where we were. We tried to do way too many things. We were chasing, the latest shiny penny all the time. And we basically got ourselves into a place where we didn't really have a product that was very effective. We didn't have really growing customers. We tried to raise more money. We failed to raise my money. And we got to a place where we actually had to make the hard decision of essentially laying everybody off in the business in a single day. It was like one of the hardest probably moments of my career to have to do that. 2 weeks later, one of my co-founders quit. And then, sort of a high profile hire that we had kept around, we had to let go because he was interviewing with other places, and essentially, and we ended up like rebooting the company, starting from scratch and actually starting to do things right. But the problem the fundamental problem was that we did all these, it kind of goes back to like what Wesley and Katie was saying. We made all these assumptions about where we didn't really talk to who our potential customers were. We did all this stuff that looks great on a whiteboard and built all this stuff. But what we should have been doing, which we eventually did, was let's just go out and talk to people that care about, or like in the space that we're interested in, and find out what is their problem, what are they doing today, and look for pain points, and then build essentially paper prototypes and bring the paper prototype back to them and be like, ask for feedback and essentially start this flywheel of feedback. And so much of what you're doing in developer relations is about, generating feedback and talking and understanding who your user is. And that was really the fundamental problem that led to us having to lay, off everybody in our company in a single day and go back to starting everything from scratch. And luckily we were able to do that. And I learned a lot along the way of doing that and having to suffer through that pain. But it really came down to making these, bold assumptions about what people wanted without actually ever checking to see if that's what they wanted.
Understood. So thank you so much, Sean. That's a very interesting experience coming from someone who's also as a founder as well, starting an organization like that. I want to jump now to going back to building strategy. And what's super interesting is each of you, very coincidentally, are quite new to your organizations that you are right now. You all have long histories in DevRel marketing, but Wesley, you're new to AWS. Sean, Skyflow, Katie, Slack. You're not. You're sort of new in those organizations, and I imagine all of you hit the ground running, right? So you knew what you were going to do before you got there, I feel. But what did you focus on in your first months in the orgs, especially when it comes to building your strategy? So if we were talking to someone that has to start and say, okay, I need to build an impactful strategy. This is day one. What do you do? What did you start with? We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to hope that everyone can summarize very concisely, and so we could get as much another question in. But let's start with you again, Wesley. Thinking about your first days or first months.
Well, when you're new to a role, the first thing is usually that you want to make sure that you get the quick wins, but you also plan for long-term success. One thing is that I try not to do the quick wins or the patches without coming up with a long-term strategy as a companion, because sometimes those patches just become permanent if you don't plan for obsolescence of what you're doing. And so that was the first thing that I did, is just do a summary of which were some of the low-hanging fruit that I could actually turn over really quickly, but made sure to also come up with a long-term strategic plan to replace those.
Interesting, good point. And you want to get hitting the ground running is about getting some winning in the beginning too, letting people know that you can get things done. Katie, any thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, coming in from a place of curiosity, I think the lesson that I shared previously is what I really try to fundamentally embody and embrace. We're coming in, we're hired into our roles for expertise. And so I've also learned to not be afraid to speak up and have ideas early on, but to really couch them and frame them and say, here's what I'm starting to observe. Here's what I'm learning. Here's some additional thoughts. How does this resonate with your understanding of the world, as that way to balance being the listener and observer and starting to share expertise and leadership and credibility quickly? I would say the second is relationship building. Even if they're folks that I won't work with immediately, really getting a lay of the land and understanding of who the key players are and what roles and influence they have. Low-hanging fruit for sure. And then I would say competitive understanding as well as audience understanding. What's unique and specific to this market and this product space, and trying to become an expert as quickly as I can.
Awesome. Thank you. I see a lot of nodding heads as well as you're speaking. And Sean, anything you want to add to what Wesley and Katie?
Yeah, so I completely agree with both of them. I think one thing I'll add though is that I don't think you don't want to come in with too much of a plan, because as the famous Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Like, exactly. You need to you can't come up with a plan until you've gone through like a discovery phase, which Katie alluded to as well. Like, you need to kind of really understand who the users are, also understand internally, who the various stakeholders are, even how they see your role, and explain what you do, dig into your competitors, all that sort of stuff, and look for both the quick wins and those kind of long-term pain points where you can develop strategy and a plan that's actually going to work. And I think the other thing around the relationship building is you need to sort of set the groundwork for building internal champions for where they understand the value of what you're bringing in. So you want to get in the trenches with people and help alleviate their problems before you start coming to them with asks, essentially.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It sounds like, internal alignment, again, is important here. Asking your team, talking to your team, getting to know who's important in your team and outside of your team as well. And learning what the priorities should be when you join the org, not coming in with them as you come in. All right, so we have about 1 minute left. I'm going to jump in with just asking you all to give what do we want to leave everyone with today. So lots going on in the world, lots of talk about recession and financial issues, and if that's something we want to give everyone a good, positive note to end this discussion with. What would you like to leave with us today? Wesley, any thoughts here? You want to say a last word and we'll go around again?
Quickly, I'll just say, be curious, have a curious mentality. If you ever lock in saying this is going to be bad, this is going to be good, you close yourself off to options. And so stay curious and don't default to your own opinion.
Sean?
Yeah, I would say that even though there's kind of this, macroeconomics going on of like, a recession and downsizing and stuff like that, we're also in a tremendous, wonderful time of growth, especially over the past 7 to 10 years in developer first companies and for people working in developer relations that are interested in it. Like this is this is a great time to be in this space. And I think it's only going to continue to grow, even though there's sort of this, outside forces that are maybe impacting the industry a little bit right now. We need to get through that, but it's still a tremendous time to kind of be out there working at the forefront of technology. And I'm, excited to be here and excited to continue to work in this space.
I think that's a great point, and we have to remind ourselves of that as well. Everything has grown so quickly that we want to keep remembering that. And Katie, last words to you.
Absolutely. And that last piece about the excitement of being in this industry and space and growth. And I give a lot of credit to SlashData, to many of the community sponsors that are part of this, other organizations focused on building community around the practice of developer relations and developer marketing. It wasn't something that existed 10 years ago, and it does now. And so we are people who are biased towards building community for others. And now we have community amongst ourselves, and really to stay connected, to stay involved, and to stay participatory in spaces like this. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know where the next opportunity is going to come from, what type of acquaintances, relationships, friendships, opportunities you're going to build. So a lot of gratitude for that. And I hope everyone sees the benefit of that as well.
Thank you so much, all of you, for joining. This was an ad hoc group, but I think it was excellent and lovely to have you all here. This was a great privilege to connect with you all, and I hope everyone in the audience also enjoyed it. I believe I'm going to pass on to Flora. Is that correct?
No, Natasha.
Or Natasha. Okay, Natasha. Thank you all for joining. Bye for now. On to you, Natasha.
Thank you, Moschoula, and a huge thank you to all you folks for coming together for this session. We really appreciate you. And a big thank you to all our speakers and participants for making this event happen. And we've come to the end of our event, sadly. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. We would really appreciate if you can give us your feedback. You can leave it on the info stand or reach out to us directly. It helps us make these events even better for you in the following years. And before we go, I'd like to remind everyone that we'll share the recordings later next week. And shortly, you will be receiving your virtual goodie bag with goodies and useful resources from us, SlashData, and our event partners. A special shout out to our milestone sponsors, Content Lab and Common Room. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you in the reflection rooms below now, which are video tables below the stage. Speakers and attendees are all welcome, and these tables will be open for another 30 minutes or so. We're not saying goodbye. I hope we can meet up at next year's summit, and until then, see you all around at the DevRelX community.